Morning. I want to acknowledge Becky Jamrose. A number of you know Becky's name. She lives in Michigan, is our church council co-chair. She is traveling this weekend, is here on her way, of course, on the day of the Arts Festival. So she just texted me that it's been a challenge with the bus, and she's walking, was hoping to get here in time for the sermon, so I'm going to talk really slowly because... the Arts Festival is a challenge today, but that's all right. We're glad you're here, and folks online, we're glad that you are here, and we are going to hear the Ten Commandments in a moment, but first, our first reading is a poem which I found, or I guess I refound it this week, and I really liked it. And then I looked through my files and discovered that I read it in church about this time last year. So maybe there's something about October that brings this poem to my attention. It's by Ariana Brown, and it's called "For Everyone Who Tried on the Slipper Before Cinderella." It's a poem of blessing. It's for everyone who tried on the slipper before Cinderella. For those making tea in the soft light of Saturday morning, in the peaceful kitchen, in the cool house. For those with shrunken hearts still trying to love. For those with large hearts trying to forget. For those with terrors they cannot name. Upset stomachs and too tight pants. For those who get cut off in traffic. For those who spend all day making an elaborate meal that turns out mediocre. For those who could not leave even when they knew they had to. For those who never win the lottery or become famous. For those getting groceries on Friday nights. There is something you know about living that you guard with your life, your one fragile, wonderful life. Wonder as in awe, as in, I had no idea I would be here now. For those who make plans and those who don't, for those driving across the country to a highway that knows them, for the routes we take in the dark, trusting, for the roads, for the woods, for the dead, humming in prayer, for an old record and a strong sun, for teeth bared to the wind, a pulse in the chest, a body making love to itself. There is every reason to hate it here. There is a list of things making it bearable. Your friend's shoulder, Texas barbecue, a new book, a loud song, a strong song, a highway that knows you, sweet tea, an orange cat, a helping hand, an unforgettable dinner, a laugh that escapes you and deflates you like a pink balloon left soft with room for goodness to take hold. For those who have looked in the mirror and begged, for those with weak knees and an attitude, for those called sensitive or too much, for those not called enough. For the times you needed and went without, for the photo of you as a child, quietly icing cupcakes, your hair a crackling thunderstorm. Love is coming. It's on its way. Look. I can't help but notice that Becky made it into the sanctuary right at that part. So, welcome. The assigned Bible reading will sound familiar. We already got a tip off of what it's going to be. We generally call this passage the Ten Commandments. So I'm going to tell you all the things you're doing wrong this morning. No, I'm not. In Judaism, this passage is referred to as the 10 words. The word that we typically translate as commandments is more words. It's like these are 10 important things that God had to say to the people. If you want to be fancy, you can use the Greek name, the Decalogue, which also just means 10 words. But the assigned lesson carves it up a little bit, leaving out a few of the verses. This is what it sounds like as assigned. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses the holy name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Honor your parents so that your days may be long in the land that your God is giving you. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's house. Do not covet your neighbor's spouse or any of their slaves or their livestock or anything that belongs to your neighbor. When all the people witnessed the thunder and the lightning, they left out the setup that Moses is delivering these words from God, but the mountain is smoking and it's a dramatic backdrop. So when the people witnessed this, the thunder and the lightning, the sound of the trumpet, the mountain smoking, they were afraid and trembled and stood at a distance and said to Moses, "You speak to us and we'll listen, but do not let God speak to us or we will die." And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, for God has shown up like this only to test you and to give you a sense of awe and reverence so that you do not sin." Those are the 10 Commandments. I'm not going to unpack them all. You can read them later or hold on and figure out how to apply them for yourselves. I'm going to take a maybe strange attack to this. Starting with a different story, a story that I heard the other day, that speed dating is back as a thing that people do. You know, a bunch of people gather together in a room and they're paired off to get some getting to know you questions, and they spend a few minutes in pairs and then they move into a different pair. So you get to know as many people as possible, I guess. It is back. I didn't realize that it had disappeared. Truth be told, I've been married long enough that I've lost track of the things that people do to find intimate connections. I just assumed it was all happening on apps these days. But that's the thing. The story, which I heard on one NPR show or another, it was about how some people have become fed up with the dating apps because people don't give genuine presentations of themselves in their profiles, which I kind of get. Just knowing how most of us process information these days, I really can't imagine anyone getting on a dating app and carefully wading through profile after profile in which someone offered up not only their dreams of the future and the best qualities about themselves, but also their worst childhood memories, the things that keep them up in the middle of the night, and the impolitic and unfortunate results of their lactose intolerance. Swipe right or left. That joke would be better if I knew which one was which. Instead, people curate their profiles. Sometimes that means a doctored picture or two. Apparently, people have ChatGPT writing parts of their profiles these days. Or sometimes it just means they write down the things that they have learned will get a response or more looks. It definitely means that they leave things out that they don't want people to necessarily know about, at least right away. Sometimes there are things that you should leave out when you're communicating about yourself, at least in some context. Every now and again, I stumble across lists of things that people have put in actual resumes when they're apparently trying to find jobs. These are from a page-a-day calendar. I'm not giving you a subtle message right now. It's surprising what people will include when they supposedly want to get a call back. These are some of my favorites. I'll introduce you to my wife if you hire me. Achievements. I came first in the school long-distance race. I don't know what the job was for. Leadership skills include World of Warcraft guild leader. And my favorite may be, none of my references really like me, so please don't believe what they say. Some things just should not be said, at least not in certain contexts. Know your audience, right? Read the room. Typically, when you meet a new person in a social setting, you don't grasp their hand, look straight and intensely into their eyes and say, "It's good to meet you. I live with real depression." Maybe we should normalize that sort of thing, actually. We really probably should normalize that. But I mean to say there's a balance to be struck between oversharing and creating an inauthentic image of ourselves. But I'm not really preaching about resumes or dating apps. I'm wondering how strategic omissions, leaving things out, can create a self-presentation and a self-understanding that is not only incomplete, but can be harmful. Sort of like medication descriptions that tell you they'll fix everything but don't tell you about the potential side effects. Or product advertisements that don't tell you the potential dangers of the products. Or maybe the early days of GPS devices when they would tell you turn right now, and they didn't have enough information to recognize that turning right now would send you into the lake, that sort of thing. Omissions can be tricky. For instance, what were those verses that got left out of the assigned Bible reading this morning? There were two sections that got cut by the committee that puts together the lectionary, or the cycle of assigned readings. The first section goes along with the part about not creating idols to bow down to. And this is what it says. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. It's a little bit tricky, and maybe they left that part out to take it easier on preachers who were talking about this. Because if you're a literalist who says that the Bible means exactly what it says, I'm not sure how you work out the math on that. If your parents make an idol, but your grandparents were super faithful, which part of the blessing or the curse are you in? Do we need to hear that warning, or do we not need to hear that warning? Probably not. Other passages in the Hebrew Bible push back super hard against the idea that God would punish people because their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents did something wrong. The Bible disagrees with the Bible, in other words. I'm more interested in the part that was left out, the other part that was left out, about keeping the Sabbath. This is what it says. The seventh day is a Sabbath. Remember, we heard, do all your work on 6 days. And then it follows with, the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or daughter, or your male or female slave, or your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Was there any part of that caught you a little bit off guard? The part about the slaves, enslaved people, for instance. I admit here that the point I'm making is imperfect because, at least as an illustration, because the lectionary committee did leave in the parts that we read a segment about enslaved people that said, don't covet your neighbor's slaves. So, when I first read this early in the week, I noticed that they left out some verses, so those are the first things that I read. And I thought, aha, they're trying to hide this fact from us. Then when I read the whole thing, they weren't trying to hide that, so I still had to, but I still wanted us to wrestle with this. They messed up my neat and tidy points, but it's worth wrestling with it. We have to grapple with the irony that the 10 words, the 10 commandments, starts by celebrating the story of God leading the people of Israel out of captivity in Egypt, out of their enslavement. That is the first word, as Judaism counts the first word, not a commandment to do or not do anything. Judaism says the very most important thing about this is, word number 1, I am the Lord your God who led you out of enslavement in Egypt. The end. Then the rest goes from there. And then the list turns around and takes for granted the idea that those same people would enslave some other people. And all it has to say about that is, don't make them work on the Sabbath, and don't covet them if your neighbor has them. So how is that for mixed messages? What does it mean when a massively important and revolutionary set of religious teachings, a set of teachings that lays out proper ways for human beings to relate to God and to relate to one another, what does it mean when that implies that God is against enslaving one group of people but seems okay with it for other groups. We who still find value in Scripture have to grapple with its inconsistencies. The 10 Commandments, or 10 words, in their context, were a radical development because they pictured God addressing an entire nation, all the people at once, regardless of the boundaries of gender and class and race. And that's not how it happened in the ancient world. All those boundaries, those divisions of gender and class and race were upheld in other cultural laws. The 10 Commandments had God, the Creator, speaking to all of the people as if they all hold the same value. And he even applied some of it to people who are outside of the nation. Everyone counts. That kind of universalism was unprecedented. And it still took a system of enslavement for granted. It was powerful and imperfect. Both of these things are true. We can play this game with other sacred documents as well. For instance, can you finish this sentence? We hold these truths to be self-evident. You know what comes next, right? Yes. All men are created equal, something, 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 life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We're savvy enough to know that this statement in the Declaration of Independence is inadequate because we know that they really did mean men when they said men. They weren't just using a generic term to count all people equally. And because we know that they really meant white men. But we still might be a little bit surprised to read through the entire document, which we don't really ever do, because it talks about universal principles of self-governance, which, again, it didn't mean to actually be universal, but it stated this revolutionary principle. And then it unloads on the King of England for all of the bad things that he's done. Those offenses include things like interfering in the governance of the colonies, making judges dependent on him if they want to keep their jobs, having a standing army when it wasn't necessary to make everybody feel threatened. But there's a last item on that list of the awful things that the King of England did. Anybody know what that last item is? Taxes, that was one of the things. But it's a pretty long list. The Declaration of Independence is a long list of grievances. And the last of the grievances says this: the king, he has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. It's revolutionary documents, principles of freedom, and creating a terrible, terrible hierarchy that has led to how many years now of oppression and alienation from the land. And yet, I do believe that all people are created equal. But we have to wrestle with what is there and not pretend that it isn't. That's what I mean to say. Refusing to acknowledge the bad parts and the hard parts does not make them go away. It just lets them keep working under the surface, like an inauthentic dating profile, but even worse, because it works at a larger level to justify and keep all kinds of inequality and oppression in place. We have to wrestle with and reckon with the horrifying parts of the Bible, because failing to do so is a betrayal of the God that we get glimpses of in those pages. And so this is what I usually say God's good news, but I would say maybe it's God's challenge. Amen.